So we're going to make a video series on section 3.1. I'm going to go over each section in depth. And this is putting our equations into radical form or into exponential form. So the first one we're going to do is turning it into radical form. So what does that mean? Radical means it's going to look like this. So we need to put it into that form. So if I look at this one, I'm going to label my n and my m. So when we write out a fraction, we always know the m is on top and the n is on the bottom. So that means our 4 here is our n and our 9 here is our m. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it in radical form. So that means the y is going to be here, my m will be 9, and my n will be 4. Easy, right? Well, we're going to get a little bit more complex as we go on. So let's do another one. Let's do 5y to the 6 over 5. Okay. So what's my n and what's my m? So what I want to do first, though, is I want to make this guy on its own little island, separate of the 5. We're going to solve for that first. So if I solve like I did the last one, it's going to be y, my m is 6, and my n is 5. But then now I need to incorporate the 5. Well, this is easy. All I have to do is think that it's being multiplied by 5. So it just means that it's going to be 5 square root y of 6. And this is my final answer. Not too bad. But what if we have two fractions involved? So let's see that as an example. So negative 3x to 2 over 5, y to 3 over 5. Well, one thing I know is I'm going to look at the denominators of my two fractions. And before I do that, though, I'm going to separate this guy onto its own little island again. I'm not looking at the negative 3. So if I have the same denominator, that means my n is going to be the same. So that means n is going to be 5. But what about my m's? Well, I have two different m's. So that's going to mean I have m1 of 2. That's going to be associated with my x. And then I have an m2 of 3 that's going to be associated with my y. So let's write that in radical form. So it has to be written like this. X, y, they have the same n, so n we said was 5. The x has an m of 2, so it goes next to the x. And we have a y of 3, so that goes next to the y. But now I need to incorporate the negative 3. Well, same thing like the last one, we just put it in front. So that's how you solve this one. But let's do an example of if it was just 1. Well, if it was just 1, let's just do the same example. X to the 1 over 5, y to 3 over 5. You would do the same exact thing. Oh, I forgot the negative here. Negative 3. You technically don't have to put the 1, because if it's 1, you don't have to write it. But if you see 1, if you see a radical equation that's written like this, you have to understand that there's a 1 here. So just keep that in mind if you see a radical expression. So we're going to kind of see that in the next examples. But going back to putting into radical form, let's do an example where we have a negative exponent. So a is a negative 11 over 8. Well, if we go back to the previous video, we said that if we have a negative exponent, that means you have to write it 1 over. So that means you have to write it as 1 over. So now I'm going to put this down here. It turns it positive. And now I can evaluate it into the radical form. My 8 is n, and my m is 11. Right? So that's how we did it. Let's do one last one. So let's say I have 14w to negative 2.5. Well, we have to find what that is as a fraction. So 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. Well, let's try 5 divided by 2. 2.5. So that's 5 divided by 2. So if I rewrite that, it's 4w to 5 over 2. But remember, it's negative. So I'm going to write it in my fraction form, because if it's negative, I have to put it as 1 over. So 14w to the 5 over 2. But once it's on the bottom, it becomes positive. So then we write it in radical form. But keep in mind that the 14 is separate. So I want this guy to be not looked at yet. I just want to do the w. So it's going to be w square root 2 to the 5th for the m. W to the 5th. And so if we incorporate the 14, we have to think of it as being multiplied. So if it's multiplied, similar to one of the examples we did in the textbook, the 14 is going to want to multiply by that 1, which means it's going to go into the top position. So with the fraction form, if you have a number on the outside, it's going to want to multiply by the top, that 1, and it's going to want to add itself to the top. So that is our answer. Okay, what if we want to put into exponential form? Let's do that next. So into exponential form. So let's do, I'm going to show 2 different examples, and I'm going to explain why they're done a certain way. So let's do this one, and let's do this one, and we'll walk through them. Okay, so I'm going to do the second one first. I'm not going to look at the 9. I'm just going to evaluate, again, our own little island. So if we're doing the opposite, we're putting it into exponential form. Well, I can see already, one thing I look for is there any exponential exponent that has a negative. Well, no, it doesn't. So it's going to be positive. So how would I write this? Well, if they're combined, I have to write my expression as AB. And then what's my n? So I know my n goes on the bottom and my m's on the top. So my m is 8 and my n is 11. And then that 9 is going to want to go on the front. But the reason why we write it as AB together is because we have the parentheses. Now, let's see another example where it's a little bit different. So do I have any parentheses here? No. So I have to write them separate as their own exponent. So here I just had to write 1 since they're combined. But here I have to picture that there's a 1 next to the A. So how I write it, if there's no parentheses, I have to separate into 2 exponents. Well, how do I do that? Well, what previous problem here, if we say we had the same denominator, we can write them as 2 fractions. So I would write this as a to the 1 over 5, because remember, if there's no number associated, you write 1, and you write b, and then so my m here is 14 over 5. So they have the same denominator. So just keep an eye out when you're doing the homework, if it has parentheses like this guy, you have to keep it together. But if it doesn't, you have to write them as 2 separate exponents because they're not together. Okay. Let's do another one. So this is an easier one, kind of like we did at the beginning. So how do I put that into exponential? My m is 9, and my 2 is n, so m over n, it's y to the 9 over 2. That one's really, really easy. Let's do one that's a fraction. So let's do 8 over 4 y to the 5th. Okay. So remember how in the last problem here, we multiplied, we multiplied by the 14 on the top, right? Well, we see the exact same thing happen here. So we know that the 8's going to be in the front. That makes it really easy. Now we're going to evaluate the bottom. Well, if it's on the bottom in a fraction form, what does that mean? That means my exponent is going to be negative. So then I write that as y. Okay, what's my m? What's my n? My m is 5. My n is 4. And then I have to write it negative. So when you see these problems, you have to just kind of ask yourself questions. Okay, what am I looking at? What do I see? Break it down, and then you can get your pieces together. Okay. We have 2 more. So let's do negative 4n over 14 square root q to the 13. So same thing again. If I know it's going to be multiplying, the 4n is going to be in the front of that top number. What about the bottom? Well, it's on the bottom. It's in a fraction form. My exponent's going to be negative. So that means it's going to be q raised to the negative. Okay, what's my m? What's my n? My m is 13. My n is 14. And that's how we write it. Okay, last one. This one's a little bit more challenging. This is an S, letter S, and this is a 5. I know it doesn't really look like it. This is also a 5. Okay. Alright, so this one's a little bit more challenging because normally we don't have a number down here on the bottom and we have a letter on top. Okay, well, how do I do this? This is confusing me. So if there's a number here on the bottom, it's going to want to stay there. So we're going to leave that guy there. And I'm going to picture this, since I don't have any parentheses, I'm going to picture that next to the V is a 1. So, and then if the number's on the top, or a letter's on the top, we know that's going to be like the original. It's going to be like this. So now I have to write the bottom in the correct form. So we know V is going to be 1, since our m is 1, and our n is what? Well, it can't be 5, because that's not, it's, picture this 5 as being down below. Let me rewrite it so it's not. Well, you ask, Rachel, if there's no number in front, what's my n? Well, what did I say? In a normal square root, the number that's always associated is a 2. So I have to write that as 1 over 2. And then my h is going to be 5 over 2. But are those positive? No, they can't be because we had a fraction, so it's negative and negative. But we're not done because that 5 is still there on the bottom. Well, the 5 is going to stay there. It's going to hang out there. So it's still going to be a fraction. And you're just going to leave that 5 there. So that's how you write this one. I think this one's probably the most confusing out of all of them because you're not sure where everything's going. But if there's a number on the bottom, just know it's going to stay there. This guy is going to go back up to the top like it normally would. And the S is just what we did in the previous examples. So the 5 is the only thing that's different in this problem. So that's how you put your equations into radical form and exponential form. The next video, we will go over the law of exponents. And then the last video will be on distributive law.